Well, hi there. My name is Perry, and welcome to the Literary Knitterary. So we are finally caught up, and today I am here to film my January wrap-up. That's right, I am actually filming the correct video for the month that it is. Very exciting stuff. In January, much like in December, I read 5 books for a total of 1,660 pages. That means my average book length in January was 332 pages, and on average I read about 53.5 pages per day. The average age of books that I read was exactly 5 years, but the mode release year was once again 2020, with 2 books, or 40% of my reading being 2020 releases. In terms of format, I diversified things a little bit, which was one of my goals going into 2021, so I read 2 print books, 2 ebooks, and 1 audiobook. In terms of where I got the books, 3 of them are from my local library, 1 of them is a print book that I had purchased at a used book sale sometime last year, and 1 of them is a print ARC that I won in a Goodreads giveaway, so thank you to Goodreads and the publisher for that. In terms of genre, I read 2 pieces of general historical fiction, 2 romances, 1 of which was contemporary and 1 of which was also historical, and 1 piece of fantasy. And in terms of age category, 4 of the books were for adults, whereas 1 book was targeted towards young adults, so that is 80% of my reading being for adults, which is just kind of funny because it is the exact inverse of December, where I read 80% YA. But without any further ado, I think we can get into the books. My first book of 2021 was The Divines by Ellie Eaton. This was the ARC that I won in that Goodreads giveaway, so thank you once again to Goodreads and to the publisher William Morrow, which I believe is an imprint of HarperCollins. This is also, I believe, the first ARC that I've ever read, like, pre-publication of the book, so that was kind of exciting and a good way to start 2021, maybe? For anyone who is curious, this came out on January 21st, so it is available and you can buy it and read it if it sounds interesting to you. This is a book about Josephine, who grew up attending the elite boarding school St. John the Divine. Elite in the sense that it is expensive and classy, not elite in the sense of, say, academically selective. The girls of St. John the Divine call each other by boys' names, terrorize the teachers, and are hated by the citizens of the nearby town. Basically, they are isolated in a bubble of their own privilege. But all of that changes when a scandal rocks the school and it is shut down forever. Decades later, Josephine is grown up and married, and she has mostly put the events of St. John the Divine behind her until a chance stopover while she's on her honeymoon gives her the chance to revisit her old stomping grounds, and suddenly she can't put the obsession to rest. So this is a little bit of a weird book. It's almost like dark academia without the focus on academics themselves. Obviously it's set at a boarding school and some dark things happen. It's one of those books where there is sort of a piece of violence or a catastrophe at the beginning of the book, and you spend the rest of the book sort of figuring out how you got there and what happened. So that's one of the timelines. That's the timeline in the past. I said this was historical fiction. The past timeline is set in the 90s, and I don't know what to say about that. It's half set in the present, half set in the 90s. If you want to consider that historical fiction, I think you can. I do feel like the fact that the previous timeline is set in the 90s is important culturally in some ways, but it's not necessarily a period piece the way you might normally think of one. Weirdly, though, despite the fact that this could easily have been a dark academic novel and chose not to be, there are a lot of classics references in the narrative voice, I believe, to characterize Josephine. So I guess it's just kind of interesting that the story itself doesn't really explore or use those elements. The other thing about the writing that I found pretty strange and frankly off-putting is that it is very physical. There are a lot of very blunt descriptions of sexual or otherwise bodily things happening in the prose, and I don't know if it is my own relationship to bodies and sexuality. I don't know if this is like a literary fiction thing. I don't know if this is, again, an attempt to characterize Josephine, who is to some extent an unpleasant or unlikable character, but it was weird. And it frankly made the book harder to take seriously. There are sentences in this book that would be totally at home in subreddits like men writing women or bad men's anatomy, I guess, or like, are the straights okay? And that takes you out of the story and makes it difficult for you to take the very serious literary writing so seriously. So that's a bit odd. The other thing that's a little bit uncomfortable is that there is definitely very present fat phobia and homophobia in this book, which makes sense because I know that it's there to characterize Josephine and the other girls, and I also know that the timeline where most of it happens is set in the 90s, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a little uncomfy or even hurtful to read about. In particular, there is a moment where a character is revealed to be queer and is violently rejected by another person, and that was a pretty difficult scene to read. And I just kind of felt a little bit weird about queerness throughout the entire novel. Like, perhaps this is just me projecting or hoping for something in this book that was never going to come out of it, but it is set in an all-girls boarding school, and frankly, the narrator's fascination with girls around her, her friend Lauren, her friend Skipper, and even the girl Jerry Lake that they all sort of hate, that fascination felt to me like it had a homo-romantic component to it, which again could be me projecting. But to spend the entire book feeling like it was borderline queer baiting me and teasing these relationships, and then to have a moment where I thought that I wasn't imagining it and it was written into the book, and then to have that immediately followed by a violent rejection of the queer character, was just a little bit of a roller coaster ride to go on. So I just wanted to mention that that's sort of how that goes, and that I didn't love the way that it was handled. I do think this is well written. A comp that's been made that I definitely agree with is with The Girls by Emma Cline. I think if you liked the writing in that, you'll like the writing in this. This is a look at teenage girls and how cruel they can be from the perspective of one of the bullies, and a look at how the decisions that we make in the past shape us in unexpected and frankly terrifying ways. The most interesting part of the book is the extreme difference between the way the narrator saw herself as a teenager and the way those around her saw her. She was so self-pitying and self-absorbed, and then she met up with people from her past and they were describing a version of herself to her that she didn't even recognize, and I thought that was very interesting. Overall, this is an interesting examination of how cruel teenage girls can be to one another, but with that said, there are better boarding school books out there. After that, I read Crazy Stupid Bromance by Lyssa K. Adams. This is the third book in the Bromance Book Club series, and this one follows Alexis, whose cat cafe, Toe Beans, has become a little bit of a haven for survivors of sexual harassment and violence after she came forward as a victim of a well-known celebrity chef. In the months since those events, she and the hacktivist turned cybersecurity expert who made the sting operation that brought down the celebrity chef possible, again, just read Undercover Bromance if you want to know what any of what I'm talking about is, have become best friends, but they're also both definitely in love with each other. Both of them are more or less happy to ignore their feelings and maintain the status quo until one day a new customer walks into Alexis's cafe and claims to be her sister and to need her help. Naturally, Alexis turns to Noah for support, but with so much craziness going on in their lives, will it ever be the right moment for them to confess their feelings to each other? So this is a case where I think my expectations were slightly mismanaged. I thought this was going to be a rom-com. The blurb even explicitly calls it a rom-com, but I kind of think there's too much angsty stuff going on. There's too much stuff going on in these characters' lives for this to be a straightforward rom-com. Alexis is obviously dealing with trauma and also with the publicity of being widely known as someone who came forward about a celebrity. Both characters are grieving the death of a parent and navigating drama with their surviving family members. And all of this is before Alexis connects with a family she never knew she had and is asked to take some major steps to help them out. So there's just a lot going on, right? And because there was so much going on and this wasn't the rom-com that I was expecting it to be, I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I have the potential to enjoy it. Friends to lovers is a superior trope for me, and there were some excellent moments of yearning, especially in the middle of the book, but because the overarching plot was about so much of this other stuff, I feel like that got a little tiny bit lost in the shuffle. Some of the descriptions of grief as the characters navigate the loss of their parents really hit home for me and connected with me and made me pretty emotional. Plus there's a big grumpy Maine Coon in it, so like, what's not to love? Yeah, this is one that I kind of feel like I should have loved, but I didn't love it, and I kind of know why, and I wonder if my experience would change upon a reread. After that, I read The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafon. In 1945 Barcelona, Daniel wakes up one morning and tells his father that he can no longer remember his mother's voice. In order to console him, his father takes him to a secret place, the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, a gigantic room filled floor to ceiling with stacks and stacks and stacks of books that nobody else remembers, and he tells Daniel to pick one out and that this will be the book that he has to protect for the rest of his life. So after walking through the aisles, Daniel picks out a book called The Shadow of the Wind. And he takes it home and he reads it and he falls in love with this novel, and suddenly he wants to learn as much about it and about its author as he can. But what he discovers is that there seems to be a mysterious figure systematically finding and burning all other copies of this author's work, and that Daniel himself might have one of the last copies that remains in existence. Thus, Daniel is sort of pulled into the sphere of a twisting tale of murder and passion and revenge and love. This is really interesting. It definitely has what I would call gothic elements, but I wouldn't go so far as to call this a mystery novel because it doesn't have a mystery plot. It has a coming-of-age plot where the main character is sort of dipping in and out of someone else's gothic tragedy. It reminds me of criticism of Villette by Charlotte Bronte that I've read, which says that basically Villette both is and isn't a gothic novel. It's a gothic novel as Lucy, who the narrative is about, experiences it, but it's a realistic novel as Lucy, who narrates the story, tells it. So this is kind of like that. It both is and isn't a gothic novel. This is very beloved in the bookish community because to some extent it is about books, and there are many very quotable passages about what books and reading do for us. And I really loved it too. This has that theme that I enjoy where things sort of get screwed up in the previous generation and it takes a new generation to be able to untangle the problems. It's kind of a jokey way of putting it, but I've been saying that if you like Wuthering Heights, you'll like this because it has a lot of the same sort of twisty, messed up family drama to it and the same sort of generational focus. And if you don't like Wuthering Heights, you will also like this because it goes somewhere and means something. This is not the time or place for me to analyze Wuthering Heights, but I feel like this had a broader message about life that, to me, Wuthering Heights did not necessarily seem to have. This was also very cathartic for me, which Wuthering Heights was not. This is the first book of the year that has made me cry, and it just made me feel clean and new, which is one of the best things I think that a book can do for us. It is far from the focus of the book, but I absolutely adored the relationship between Daniel and his father, the way they grow apart a little bit as he's an adolescent, and then the way that they grow back together just touched me. It was beautiful. If you didn't pick up on it already from my comparison of this to two separate Victorian novels, I think this has a very Victorian feel, almost a Dickensian feel. One of the twists in here is a bit predictable, but the other one is completely shocking. This is a piece of historical fiction that motivated me to learn more about real history. I want to do research into the Spanish Civil War now. It is obviously not a perfect book. Among other things, it has a slight case of the, for lack of a better term, what I'm going to call the literary fiction woman, who is just so opaque and mysterious and inscrutable. Nobody can know what she's thinking because of how much she is a woman. And once I noticed that, it was hard not to notice that the female characters in this novel do not have a whole heck of a lot of agency. But truthfully though, reading this was an amazing experience. I understand why it is so beloved, and I would love to have an entire weekend to just curl up on the couch and read this book for 4 and 5 hours at a time. It was lovely to be within its pages. Following up on that, we had another uncontested winner of a book, and that is The Duke Who Didnt by Courtney Milan. This is a book about Chloe Fong, who has a to-do list every day, and her lists have been getting longer and longer in the months leading up to the commercial launch of her father's new sauce that they're hoping to sell. She doesn't have time for any foolishness, and she certainly doesn't have time for her childhood friend Jeremy, who has come back to her small town and seems to be attempting to marry her. Jeremy knows that he kind of doesn't deserve Chloe. For one thing, he hasn't been able to make himself into the serious young man that he believes she wants, and for another thing, over all these years, he's never managed to tell her that he is a duke and he owns the entire village that she lives in. Jeremy can't stand the idea of sending Chloe's perfectly planned life into chaos, but he also can't stand the idea of living without her. This book is so good. This book is so good. I believe the first romance books that I ever read, or the first romance books that I ever read expecting to enjoy them, were the Brothers Sinister series by Courtney Milan, and she just does a lot of things really well. Her banter is always so funny to me and so well written, and I think her books strike a really excellent balance between sort of levity and humor and angst. I think this book was a standout to me for a couple of reasons, one of which being that I related really hard to the heroine, who is a type A perfectionist who hates asking for help and constantly has giant to-do lists, and if she just plans everything perfectly and works as hard as she possibly can, everything will be okay and there's no reason to be anxious. And I connected to that a little bit. This obviously has some excellent tropes, including childhood friends to lovers and a sort of grumpy sunshine pairing, but most importantly, and there could be the minorest of spoilers here, so if you want to read this and you don't want any information about how the plot of the book is going to run, skip to maybe this timestamp. This book does not have a third act breakup. yeah, once you hit the 2/3 mark, it's just two reasonably mature people working together to try to build a life where they can be together and both be happy and fulfilled, and that was just really nice. You're reading the book and you know that there's going to be a discussion, and you think you know how the discussion is going to go and that it's going to lead to a third act breakup, and then the discussion comes and there's no breakup. And it was just so refreshing. I really don't like a third act breakup. I like seeing the characters together, and so when they break up for no reason other than to add conflict to the story, I just kind of roll my eyes, right? Like, I would rather have more of them trying to make it work than have them immediately call it quits and then realize that they blah 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 blah. In the author's note, Courtney Milan said she was very intentionally trying to subvert your ideas of how a romance is going to go, and I would say she did so incredibly successfully. This book is super amazing. I don't want to make it sound like I think it is the job of a book by a marginalized author to teach me something, but with that said, I did learn a lot while reading this book, and the book made me curious to do my own research. This is another piece of historical fiction that got me interested to do more reading and research about historical, fact. And I have also heard other reviewers say that they really appreciated the way that racism and colonialism were acknowledged in the book without being the primary driving forces of conflict or drama in the plot. They are obviously a factor and an important factor, but the general tone of the book is not about suffering in that way. It is a pretty joyful book, and it is one that clearly brought me a lot of joy. And finally, for January, I listened to the audiobook of Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire. This is the third book in the Wayward children series, and I think it's the first audiobook I've listened to in like a year. So that was a pleasant change. I would say the main character of this book is Cora, who is settling in pretty well at Eleanor West's School for Wayward Children when a girl wearing a sugar dress suddenly falls out of the sky and declares that she has an emergency and the students need to help her find and recover her mother, or else her world, Confection, a Candyland, will be under the influence of a tyrant forever, and the girl herself will never exist. The only wrinkle is that the girl's mother, the person that they have to find, is a previous student at Eleanor West's who was murdered before Cora got to the school. So Cora and a group of the other students set off on an impossible quest to put the world of Confection to rights. So this is in some ways a fairly direct sequel to book 1 of the series, Every Heart a Doorway. I tend to enjoy this series, and this book was no different. I feel like the main complaint that adult readers have about this series is that at times the authorial voice or the voice of the characters can be a little bit on the nose, a little bit didactic, and that definitely bothered me a bit more in this book than it did in the previous 2 books in the series. There were some moments that were a little bit eye-roll worthy to me, a little bit cringy, and I think I figured out how to articulate what the issue is for me. For me, it feels like there are moments where the characters' internal voices, their internal monologue, sounds like the way people who share their identities sound when they are explaining out loud to someone who doesn't understand them who they are and how they talk about themselves. Like, the voice inside the character's head sounds like the way they would speak if they were trying to educate someone else, which just doesn't feel super natural. So while that did irk me a tiny bit more in this installment than in the previous 2 books in the series, I definitely enjoyed my experience of listening to the book overall. In particular, I really appreciated that this installment included more and deeper exploration of the world building of this entire universe, of how the worlds and the doors work and how they relate to each other and what governs the way that certain worlds turn out. I really enjoyed all of that, and overall, just like the other books in the series, this is a fun, sweet adventure full of heart. This one, I guess, in particular is sweet because they spend half the book in a literal Candyland. It's like a hug in a book. But yes, those are all 5 of the books that I read in January. Please let me know if you have read any of these books, and if so, what you thought of them, or what your favorite book was that you read in January, or if that sounds too complicated right now, but you still want to let me know that you were here, you can just leave me an emoji in the comments down below. If you liked this video, I do hope you'll consider subscribing, and I will see you again soon. But in the meantime, I hope that everyone is staying happy, healthy, and safe, and I hope that somewhere out there is a great book waiting just for you. Bye!